have I got a surprise for you. If you've been playing the overworld and you've been wondering what comes out of which rocks, if you should go to stage 1, 2, or 3, which region, I've done all the maths and calculations, and I've spent weeks and weeks getting all this information just for you. I've been doing it since PB2 dropped, and it is finally ready for me to show you guys. Now, obviously I couldn't do this all myself. I wrote a lot of the algorithms and formulas, but I really did get all the information from the Wildfire Guild. Now, I put in some of it myself, but I got it from the Wildfire Guild. I asked them for their help. If you want to help out, the link is down below. But more specifically, Boyo, R-Boots, and Eversick all really helped me put this together, and I have them to thank. So let's jump into this. It's going to be crazy. The first thing we'll look at is the rarities. So what I basically did is I went through and I got all the different resources. You can see here I've got 300 entries. Basically, I filled in the stage, the region. I'm not doing major region things today, but I can do that in the future. Leave a comment if you would like that. And I put in all the different resources. I also got the amount of resources that came out of the rock and the uniqueness from it. Now, you guys need to consider that this data isn't going to be absolutely perfect, because in the case anyone gathering data went through to all the rocks and only picked the best ones, that's going to mess it up a little bit. But I have spoken to the people gathering the data for me, and they all said that they weren't doing that. They were just getting every rock whenever they recorded it for this information. I know I did myself as well. So at least 80 to 90% of the information should be really solid. But obviously you need a much larger sample size to be really, really confident. There's a chance that everyone either got really unlucky or really lucky, so it's not perfect. But the 300 sample size is pretty good. It's a tiny bit lackluster from stage 3. I will be adding to it still, so I might have an updated video in the future. So take stage 3 with a tiny bit of grain of salt. The other two are really solid data though. So let's go into it. So I go into the dashboard here and I've got a few different things. I'm going to go through them one by one. So firstly is the rarity. What rarities are coming out of the different rocks? You can see that for tier 1 rarity, seismic quartz, I think I just have one data point for this one, and it was really unlucky, so you can ignore that. But it looks like tier 1s are pretty often found in Mogonite, which we know is the gem ore, and bismuth, which seems to have a lot of tier 1 materials as well. You also find that geodyne and albite are finding tier 5 materials even in stage 1 runs. And we'll talk about a lot of this as we go as well. In stage 2, the data starts to look a little bit different. Again, I got really unlucky with seismic quartz on stage 1 and 2. Maybe I'm alone in that, I'm not sure. But you're starting to see that some of this stuff starts to really come to fruition. Lazurite has a much more even spread of different tiers and rarities. Geodyne as well, but feldspar and bismuth are still on the low end. They're getting a lot of that tier 1 and tier 2s, even in stage 2 runs. So feldspar and bismuth have some of your lower tier stuff, and we'll see if that matters in the end, because there's some other things we need to look at as well. Mogonite is a little bit more evenly distributed this time, but still a lot to the lower end. You'll find that albite, lazurite, and even feldspar a little bit. They've got a lot of tier 4 things in there, so they're pretty good. These 3 at their end are all special nodes, and we'll explain what they are later, but you'll be able to figure it out pretty easily. As we go to stage 3 rarity, it starts to get a bit more interesting with your albite having a lot of tier 5 materials in it, but also your geodyne. Geodyne is really heavy on the ores and has a pretty good distribution of higher end stuff. So if you're trying to get those resources that you need to get in bulk for a specific thing, go for those geodyne ore deposits and you'll get them really, really fast. This goes for stage 0 as well. Also looking at everything looks a lot more balanced now. Now, albite has a far disproportionate amount of tier 5 stuff compared to everything else. So albite's just your better ore in general. But for everything else, it looks like a pretty even distribution. Feldspar has quite a bit of tier 4. It looks like Feldspar's distribution is a lot closer together. So even though some of the other things are like a lot of tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, Feldspar is like in a stage 3 run, it's a lot of higher end stuff. Stage 2, it's a lot of mid tier stuff. Stage 1, it's a lot of the lower end stuff. So that's kind of where we're sitting at for the Feldspar deposit, which can be great, has its use case. If you want to find the low end stuff in particular, then go to Feldspar and you'll get lots of those materials in the one run. Maybe you want lots of lithium, which is a tier 1. Okay, the next thing I looked at was uniqueness. Now, this is pretty inconclusive. It looks like they're all pretty balanced, so maybe we're not going to get much data here. But basically what I looked at was what was the typical, I looked at the median specifically, what was the typical quantity of resources that you would get from each of these nodes, and then also looked at the uniqueness. So if you had a node that got 10 different resources, but it got 10 lithium, the uniqueness of that lithium would be just 1, okay? Because it only got 1 unique item in that ore deposit. Whereas if it got 10 different items, the uniqueness would be 10. You can see that these are all quite similar, but more specifically, Albite has a lot of duplicates of things. Bismuth also has a lot of duplicates of things, and Geodyne as well. Whereas Lazurite and Feldspar have a little bit more diversity, and Mogonite has the most diversity out of anything. Obviously, there's like 40 different kinds of gems you can find, so them being split across is no surprise at all. And then Tectonic Neovite has surprisingly not that much uniqueness, and Seismic Quartz not very much at all, which isn't quite a shock. As we keep going, we can see that this starts to shift up a little bit, but you can see Albite is pretty much the opposite here, where it has a lot of unique items. I guess since it's higher end stuff, as it starts to get to stage 2 and stage 3, there's a lot of range of different things it can have in there, but everything's pretty unique at this point. There's not a whole lot of duplicates going around. I did have some rocks with like 4 or 5 of the same thing, and some rocks with 1, but just they're pretty balanced. I don't think this was really giving me the information I was hoping to find. But again, Bismuth and Albite have a lot more diversity than a lot of the other things, and we're about to find that out very soon. I'll actually skip that one. I'll go to distribution, and then we'll cover off shards. And this is definitely recording. Good. Okay. So distribution. Now, here's where I looked at gems, ores, and shards. Now, this isn't a shock for most of it. Geodyne and Feldspar, they've got ores in them. We got that. That was obvious. At the other side of things, Seismic Quartz has a lot of shards. Tectonic Neovite has a lot of ores, but has a little bit of a distribution. And Helioagate, which would leave gems. It would have a lot of gems. And you can see that in some of the other stats, but that's just common knowledge for the most part. And where it starts to get interesting is Lazurite has a significantly disproportionate amount of shards compared to everything else. However, Bismuth and Albite do have a little bit of shards in there, so they cannot be discounted. But what's worth noting is they also have quite a few gems. So they seem to be a heavy mixed deposit, and that's kind of the point of them. They're a big mix. Deciding which one is best has been a little bit inconclusive so far, although Albite is clearly showing to have higher tier things in general. So maybe Albite is better, but you can see that it's also a bit more focused on ores, especially in stage 1, because I guess it's easier to get higher tier ores at this stuff. It seems to be more heavily weighted. As we get to the stage 2 distribution, you see that Mogonite is heaps and heaps of gems, Helioagate the same, Lazurite has a lot of shards, but you can see the shards quantity on Bismuth and Albite starts to really catch up. It's not quite at the same level, but you're getting a lot less ores from it. So if you're sick of getting ores and you've been getting ores everywhere and you want gems or shards for whatever reason, get these ones, forget Feldspar and forget Geodyne, even though they have a little bit of a mix. But Lazurite has pretty much got no gems at this point, and Lazurite has no gems on stage 3 as well. So it's really interesting that it has very little gems in it, which might be good in its own right. As we get to the stage 3 distribution, the Seismic Quartzes I did find had just shards, although I know that they can find ores as well, even if very few. And the lesson we're learning here is that Seismic Quartz is really good on stage 3 runs. I'll show you up here. Seismic Quartz is really good on stage 3 runs. It has a pretty even distribution, but a lot of T5 stuff, whereas some of the other ones just don't. The other thing we'll notice is that Albite is starting to pick up with shards distribution heaps of shards in your stage 3 Albite, and not very much in your stage 3 Bismuth. So if you go into a stage 2 area, Bismuth and Albite are pretty even neck and neck for the most part, especially if you're going for shards. But if you go into stage 3 area, get the Lazurite and get the Albite, and they're actually really good for shards in general. So that's really, really exciting stuff. And it looks like if you're doing a shard run at all, probably go to a stage 3 area, maybe go to stage 1 and 2 for catching alluvials, because I found pretty good distribution. And I'll be researching that next if I get 100 likes and if you start leaving comments down below. So the last thing we're going to look at is shards themselves. So all these distributions are really great, but they are missing some key features. So as I'm looking at the different tiers and the different rarities across the different ore nodes, and then I'm looking at which ones has shards, the overlap isn't very precise, because what it's telling me is even if Albite has a lot of T5 things in it, all the shards it's finding might be T1 shards. We just don't know. We actually had a look at the analysis for the different distribution of the specific shard kinds across the different stages. So the shards coming from Geodyne and Feldspar are pretty much all common on a stage 1 area. Lazurite and Albite have a pretty cool distribution between common, uncommon, and rare. But Albite's getting a lot more rare, as we've established already. And then Bismuth is getting a lot more uncommon than common. So it seems to just have rarer things in general than Lazurite and Feldspar and Geodyne, but still not as rare as Albite. As we continue on to stage 2 shards, these trends seem to continue a little bit, although Bismuth starts to really fall behind. And Albite's starting to find epic shards, whereas Lazurite is barely finding epic shards. Now, Albite might not find shards as often as Lazurite, but your shards are just better. They're just coming out better. I don't know what to tell you guys. Feldspar's also found some rare shards, but that looks a bit more like an outlier than anything conclusive. As we get to stage 3 shards, you can see Albite's finding a little bit of everything, and quite a few Resplendents have come from it. And Lazurite's getting a lot of epic shards. So Lazurite's still really strong in this stage 3 area. It's not really falling behind. Bismuth looks like a bit of an outlier as well, but it's finding pretty good shards as well. But yeah, Albite and Lazurite, go for those bad boys and you'll be doing all right. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you appreciate all the different analysis of statistics I went through. If there's anything else you want to see from these sorts of stats, I've got all the data ready to go. I just need to put it into charts. Let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to check out my next video.